Let's get ready to rumble!
Welcome to Boxing Unwrapped. It's Boxing Unwrapped, more popular in Europe than the UK's entry to Eurovision. I'm Ryan.
Yes, even after the recount, or especially after the recount. I'm Andrew.
Especially after the recount.
How did you get that wrong, by the way?
Well, do you know what? I think it might have something to do with, I think it was Greece had a whole bunch of points taken off them because, their judges had mentioned who they'd voted for in the semi-finals. So, we'd been given their points, but we're actually, I think then those points were taken away because none of their points counted.
Sounds like make an interesting thesis topic. Sorry, we're getting way off topic. So early on.
Guys, welcome to Boxing Unwrapped. We've got some a real great topic that some of you have actually asked for before. So, Andy, do you want to tell the good people what we've got for them today?
We are going to talk about who the F is Roy Jones Jr., the boxer, the great, the legend. We will dive into all the usual aspects of his life, both professional and personal. A bit of a review of his boxing style and obviously accomplishments, and round it off by saying exactly how good was he?
How good was he? Well, let's jump right in. So, who the F is Roy Jones Jr.?
He's a boxer, right?
He's a boxer. I think he did some boxing.
Have you not done any research?
Totally, I know. I don't know, man. I kept coming up with some sort of pirate, And I'm pretty sure, is there not a member of Led Zeppelin called Roy Jones Jr.? I don't know.
I have no idea.
I have no idea. Pretty sure there's...
I actually heard that he's primarily a rapper and occasionally boxes. That's
fuck, man. Have you listened to any of his music?
I should have done, but no, I haven't. Is it awful?
Oh, it's terrible. It's really, really bad. It's just when someone has enough money to make an album, but so it doesn't really matter whether or not it's shit. Mm-hmm. That's what's happened. It's just, it's not good. It's not worth a stream. It's worth a stream just to listen to, but not on it's not going to go onto your playlist that you listen to on a regular basis. Heavy rotation.
Heavy rotation. It's not heavy rotation worthy. Has he got flow or no?
No, I don't think so. I think he. It's very stunted, right. And it's just a bit corny, I think, to be honest. Mm-hmm. If you imagine what would happen if a boxer released a rap album. That is genuinely what it is.
It's not shocking anyone with its approach or quality.
No, you've not gone, oh my god, actually, what a talented boxer and rapper. It's not he could have done either.
He makes me sick. He can do everything.
I know, it's not that. It's definitely not that.
Right, okay.
So, the man himself, Roy Jones Jr., I really thought, because obviously I hadn't done any research into his personal life or childhood before. I'd seen his fights and stuff, mm-hmm. And he follows that mold that we've talked about in the past. He started actually training in boxing at 6 years old, mm-hmm. So started at a young age, but. Did you come across any of the stuff about his dad?
Yeah, very nice man, very encouraging, motivational.
Fucking hell. So, and for those of you who don't know, Roy Jones Jr. grew up on a pig farm in Florida. Right? And his dad used to be in the military and left the military when little Roy was born. And decided that hog farming was the way forward. From a very young age, Roy Jones Jr. found that his dad enjoyed roughhousing with Roy Jones. Because his dad is actually, I think he was also a fighter.
Yeah, not at a high level, but he was a fighter, wasn't he? He was a boxer.
Mm-hmm. He was a boxer, so he was very interested in the sport. So, I think he kind of push that onto his son at a very young age. And one of the things I thought very interesting was that Roy Jones Jr. Kind of based some of his understanding of how to fight from watching the cockfighting that his father did when he was young. So, like, not only did they have hogs on the farm, but they raised chickens and obviously fighting chickens, cocks, to do cockfighting with.
He does an impersonation of a cock, doesn't he? As in a chicken, not as in a penis. During a fight, is it Tony when he's fighting with Tony? He pretends to. He sort of postures. There's a lot of showboating. I mean, come on to that later, but yeah, that's where it came from. That's where it was implanted to do the chicken dance.
To do the chicken dance. But like I saw like an interview with his sister, and she was like, you know, there were points where like our dad's like behavior towards like Roy was like borderline like child abuse.
It's just basically abuse, yeah.
It's just basically abuse, which and like, you know, they were. This is not to say that they weren't close. They were very, very close. Like Roy Jones Jr.'s dad ultimately started a boxing gym and trained his son out of that boxing gym. So, you know, despite the abuse, I guess is the only way of putting it, like they were very close. You know, his dad was very like a big part of his career, especially in the
large, yeah. Apparently, the father's approach was like super altruistic to all other children in the boxing gym and all the youngsters, and developing them and getting them like more and more of them brought in to help out, you know, children from difficult backgrounds and stuff. He was this kind of like friendly figure to everyone but his son, who he just beat on all the time.
Yeah, totally. Like, and like, you know, as Roy like got older and older, his dad would punch him harder and harder. Like, it's insane, man. It's really insane.
So the quotation, or when he was being interviewed about it later on, I don't know if you saw this as well, but he said Jones, when talking about his childhood, said, after a while I didn't care about getting hurt or dying anymore. I was in pain all day, every day. I was so scared of my father. He'd pull up in his truck and start looking for something I'd done wrong. There was no escape, no excuse, no way out of nothing. Getting hurt or dying might have been better than the life I was living. Used to think about killing myself anyway. Cheery stuff.
It's fucking rough, man. It's rough.
But it made him fearless. That was the thing. That I don't, and it's unclear whether that was the father's somehow. However, it was a bit misguided in application. But his intention was to make him, you know, so tough to be a champ.
And like, you know, despite all this, he was a champ from a very young age. 1984, he wins the U.S. National Junior Olympics in the 54 kilogram weight division. 1986, he wins the National Golden Gloves in the 63 kilogram weight division. Then in 87, he wins Golden Gloves in the 71 kilogram division. As an amateur, he ended his career at 121-13 record, which is pretty strong.
It's pretty strong.
It is pretty strong. It's no Lomachenko or like Usyk, who like fought everybody in the world at amateur level, but like, you know, it's pretty strong. And one of those losses on his amateur record we're going to have to talk about.
Well, we've mentioned this in a previous episode, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
That's how we do it.
That's how we do it. So, you know, we'll just recap for some of you who may have missed that episode.
I mean, probably there's no one listening that's not listened to our entire back catalogue. But, you know,
I mean, we took a small break. That's what they've been doing in the meantime, Andy. They're just like sitting around pining, waiting.
We should have done a rebroadcast last week. Oh, no, we did release an episode last week, but we should have done a rebroadcast.
I know. We don't want to cheapen it quite yet. We're not at that stage. I don't think our back catalogue's big enough yet.
I don't know, man. 50 odd episodes nearly.
I know, fuck it.
Anyway.
Man, it's mad. Anyway, so 1988 Seoul Olympics. He's in the 156 pound weight category, where he wins the silver medal in the final because motherfucker was robbed.
He was robbed.
He was robbed.
He was robbed at gunpoint by some whining and dining South Korean officials.
And like, which is quite interesting actually, that like even now in 2019, we still haven't sorted out the boxing at the Olympic Games.
No, it's basically made no progress whatsoever. So just to say the story, he got beaten 3-2 by Park Si-hun in the final, a South Korean boxer who reportedly apologized afterwards because it was so clear to basically everyone bar the two of the blind judges, that Roy Jones had won the final at a counter. He didn't lose a round in any of the previous matches, and he shouldn't have lost a round in the final. And there was all sorts of allegations, although they still remain not totally proven, that there were some influence regarding the judges and some South Korean officials and some whiskies and cigars, shall we say.
Well, and 2 of the 3 judges that voted for Park were eventually banned from the sport for life.
Yes.
Which I think, like, I kind of is a bit like, what is this? But he did end up, I think that they should give Roy Jones Jr. that gold medal, because it's obvious that there was corruption.
Yeah, clear. Everyone knew that. And there was no one, I think, within any sort of sense would have watched it and gone, oh no, he didn't win that. Iba stepped into the breach, though, and awarded him the Val Barker Trophy.
What is the Val Barker Trophy?
It's a trophy for the most, I think it's like the most sort of stylish boxer at the particular Olympics. And normally, I think this was the last time that a non-winner of an Olympic gold medal had won the trophy. So they awarded that to say to him that, other organisations may be corrupt, but they are definitely not.
So, he then starts his journey in professional boxing. Taking the world by storm with his unbelievable style and knockout abilities as well,
Yeah.
He steps onto the stage in the professional level, and he's just literally knocking every motherfucker out.
So he won all 21. Sorry, he won his first 21 fights in a row before he got to like a world title shot, and all bar one were by knockout, either knockout or TKO.
Which is crazy, to think about that.
He's George Foreman described him as hits like a heavyweight and moves like a lightweight.
Which I think is probably quite apt. Well, I think while he was in the lower weight classes, I think is probably quite apt, because
while he was at the peak of his power. Yeah, while he was like before he declined, shall we say?
Yeah, exactly. He then comes up against Mr. Bernard Hopkins the first time.
For the first time.
For the first time. And, he wins his IBF World Middleweight title, which I think actually, we've talked about Bernard Hopkins before. And, this is when, this is like before steep decline of B-Hop.
Yeah. This is
this is prime B-Hop, isn't it?
Yeah, and he was not too shabby a fighter at that point. One of the generational greats as well, but at that point in his 22nd fight when Roy Jones Jr. won the title, he was no match. Hopkins was no match for him. He did go the distance, but
he did well. But Roy Jones Jr. says he had a broken hand.
He did. Otherwise, you knocked him out.
Knocked him right out.
So it's at this point and for the next foreseeable period of time where he's into his the peak of his powers, where he's just looking so good that it's like frightening, where everything is like working to its absolute optimal, and he's looking like the most phenomenal boxer, period.
And he's just collecting belts as he goes along. Like, he's just like beating motherfuckers hands down. No one can absolutely touch him. Until, I would say, his first fight with Mr. Montel Griffin. And this is when I think the signs that the wheels are coming off the bus. Because I watched these fights, his two fights, in research for this podcast. And the first fight against Montel Griffin, he loses through disqualification.
Yes.
And that's because he hits Montel Griffin twice after a knockdown. But he gets knocked down in that fight, and Montel Griffin was really fucking putting the pressure on, especially in the early rounds. Because we're now at a point where he's campaigning at light heavy, and his kind of size and speed are there, but he doesn't really have the power that he was managing to hold at the kind of middleweight and super middle levels, where he was able to kind of deliver those knockouts as easily. But it's brutal. Have you watched this, where he the guy's on his knees and he punches him twice in the face?
I didn't rewatch it recently. I have seen it. I have seen it in the past, but yeah, I vaguely remember it.
And I think that's where he starts. For me, he starts looking like he's coming up against opposition that are big muscular men. And Griffin, in the first fight, obviously he knocked him out in the second, but in the first fight, the early rounds, he had all the answers to Roy Jones Jr. in the early rounds. He was just kind of pushing him about and shit, and just fuck off and punching him. It was really interesting to see. Yeah.
He avenges the loss to Griffin, and he then goes on a fairly extended winning run. But you're saying from watching it back, you already think that given his sort of style, that he's no longer sort of peak. He's still obviously beating everyone for a long period, but you think he's actually he's then actually sort of just tipped over. Is that what you're saying?
I think that from my perspective, I think that is the early warning signs that something's wrong. Because if you up until that point, absolutely unstoppable, right? And he is early at this stage in his light heavyweight light heavyweight career rather. He's only had one other fight at light heavy before it, and that against Mike McCallum. But he's only 5'11". We've got to remember as well. So carrying up the power that he had in the kind of middleweight and super middleweights, I think that kind of showed to me initially. I was like, he's now coming up against men that have power as well, because they're just bigger men. Yeah,
it's worth noting that he started his professional career at light middle. So yeah, and like you say, he's 5'11". So I mean, he's not a big man really.
No, but when he was at those lower weight divisions, he was proper solid as fuck. Especially against the competition. They usually had that kind of physique where they're almost thin but big for the weight, if that makes sense. Whereas he was just solid as fuck for the weight. So of course, when he throws a punch, he's gonna knock people the fuck out, because there's just pure mass behind it. So yeah.
But he so he goes on this extended run after this. He goes on this extended run of, I think he does 12 fights after he becomes the unified light heavyweight champ, until it really starts to go off, and he wins by Well, before we got into that, we should say that he doesn't stop there in terms of going up the weight division. March of 2003, he becomes the first man in 106 years to be both a middleweight and a heavyweight champion, with his defeat of John Ruiz for the WBA heavyweight championship.
It's fucking ridiculous.
It's utterly ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. I mean, Ruiz is kind of handpicked, it has to be said, in terms of, I mean, it's not like fighting, you know, it's not like he beat like a Klitschko. You know what I mean? It's not like he beat a prime Klitschko. He beat a John Ruiz, who people certainly in the UK might remember as when Hay was on his heavyweight adventure. John Ruiz was one of the men that he beat. I think maybe for the title or for one of his defence, but Hay beat Ruiz. Ruiz has won some, lost some against a lot of a lot of well-known names, but he wasn't huge as a heavyweight, was he? He's like maybe 6'2" or something. Fairly lacking mobility, shall we say? So he was kind of. It wasn't like Roy Jones Jr. just went, "I will beat any heavyweight." That was not the case.
Yeah,
Ruiz was a hand-picked heavyweight champion. But still, even saying that, it's still pretty impressive.
It is indeed. But after that, after coming back down from heavyweight to light heavy,
he's proper fucked then.
He's proper fucked because he beats Antonio Tarver in a majority decision.
Scrapes it, yeah.
Scrapes it, and then he has him in a rematch and gets, we can only describe as knocked the fuck out, like real bad. Real bad.
Yeah.
It's not good for him.
It's not good.
It's not good for him.
And that, he then is defeated by Glenn Johnson and in a ninth round stoppage, and then he's defeated by Antonio Tarver again by unanimous 12-round decision. So this time he's lost 3 fights in a row.
Yeah, and with the one with Glenn Johnson, you see the knockout, and actually I think most boxers, if they watched it back, would go, I think I need to stop. Because he's like, he gets knocked out and he's twitching.
Yeah.
It's not nice. Like, he's twitching, like he's not awake for a while. They have to like remove his mouth guard and shit from his mouth while he's unconscious. Mm-hmm. And like, poor Sean Glenn Johnson, by the way, who did not show any concern for Roy Jones Jr. He's like, woohoo, fuck yeah.
3 minutes Jones was on the canvas for after being counted out.
Insane. It's insane. It's really bad.
So yeah, we've talked. So I think that's almost. I mean, the other famous one, obviously, we can talk about is he wins 3 fights in a row. Most famously, after that, after recovering from his 3 defeats, 3 fights in a row, most famously beating Felix Trinidad, another all-time great in 2008. Felix Trinidad at this point was even more advanced in terms of like father time catching up with him, and also it was at a catch weight that was beyond Trinidad's normal weight. I think it was at 170. So he won that, and that was like a big money fight because Trinidad's like a legend as well. But he was, I think he retired after that fight, so it shows you where he was. And then, of course, there's the fight against Calzaghe.
Oh, Christ, man. Which actually, like, he starts out strong because he knocks Joe Calzaghe down in the first round.
Yeah. But that just makes him angry, right? That just makes him angry.
Fucking hell, Joe Calzaghe, like, the shape of Roy Jones Jr.'s eye at the end of this, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm surprised his corner didn't just go, look, we need to stop this now. Because it's humiliating, actually. Actually, guys, go back and watch this. I'll put a link in the description. I'll try and find it online for YouTube. I'll put a link in the description, and it is fucking unbelievable, the showboating that comes out of Joe Calzaghe that night. Like,
the irony of this being that, I mean, if anyone liked a good showboat, it was Roy Jones Jr. He was like the king of showboat. He does with his like what do you call it? Where they do it in kind of UFC, where they do like flying punches.
Yeah.
What's the name for it? Like, not like a dragon punch or something. What do you call it? There's like a name for it. Where basically you launch off your feet and then throw the punch as you're sort of flying through the air forwards. And Jones does stuff like that. He lands one of them and kind of knocking down Tony when he does it. In his super middleweight championship fight where he's the underdog going in, because Tony's like a pound for pound best, and he's doing like flying punches at him and stuff, and imitating a chicken. It's like, oh my word! So yeah, it's like it's interesting. Obviously, that he was on the receiving end of that against Calzaghe, but it was a prime Calzaghe versus a very over the hill Roy Jones Jr. So. And that's what made it such a mismatch. But it's brutal to watch. And you think, why would you, after this, when you know you've been that good, why not just at that point go, do you know what? I think I'm done. If not before, just be like, I'm done now. But he didn't. Know. He carried on fighting for another 10 years.
I did. Well, I mean, he did beat everybody's favorite Jeff Left Hook Lacey.
He did. Yeesh.
I mean, he does. We spoke about him before when we talked about these boxers who should have quit but didn't.
Yeah,
and he's like,
he's the prime example of that.
He is the prime candidate. He should have just stuck with his fucking hip hop career.
That would have been more painful for the viewers or the listeners rather than himself. Definitely.
Yeah.
So. I think that's and so he's carried on for another 10 years after that. We don't need to talk about it because it's kind of, I think it is obviously it's diminished a bit, and we've spoken in previous episodes about how he's basically saying that he's got no quit and he doesn't want to, he wanted to carry on fighting and he loves the fighting, etc., etc. But I think despite having all of these losses on his record, I think just in terms of like the sheer numbers, like his accomplishments in terms of like winning titles in different weight divisions and at his prime, being able to like just destroy the next best fighters, and obviously the style in which he does it, he does go down as I think with the passing of time he'll go down as one of the all-time greats, and I think he's most people's, if not everyone's, like boxer of the 90s. I think most people would say he was the best boxer of the 90s, not universally, definitely, but I think most people would.
Yeah, I mean, I think he definitely, especially because he had such character as well.
Like, chat. So, there's a couple of things that are quite interesting. We talked about his rap career, such as it was. He did things like, so there's one of his fights now, let me remember which one it is. One of his fights, he conducts an in-ring interviews 1 hour before the fight starts.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of going into his room, preparing mentally, warming up, he is conducting a press conference from the ring, and he then goes on to beat his Bryant Brannon, who he beats within an hour, after an hour of finishing the press conference. The fight before that against Eric Lucas, who he knocks out as well, he played a basketball game in the morning of the fight.
Jesus Christ.
He's mental. He's just I think, undiluted self-belief. Do you know, I kind of, some of the stuff he did in the style, all this hands down, like crazy punching angles, he's like the fighter that Nas wanted to be but wasn't quite. Do you know what I mean? Like it was that totally. Kind of like totally unorthodox style. And like super reliant on just incredible like reflexes and stuff, which is the tragedy for Jones. His style is so unsuited for the longevity of his career because it's all like reflex based, speed based, athletics based, and that's the sort of shit that goes first. Whereas rather if he'd just been like a slugger, then like George Foreman who could fight into his 50s, like. You hit me, I'm gonna hit you first.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit you. Hit me fine, I'll knock you out. Like George Foreman didn't need to move or anything, right? Like he just had to sit there and like throw an unbelievable punch. Mm-hmm. Whereas like holding your hands down, like your reaction speeds, your like ability to like move quickly, all that kind of stuff's gonna go. So you have to like change your style in order to fit your age at that point. But I don't think anybody said to him like, Roy, don't know if you know this, right? But you're like 45 now, so you need to just rein it in a little bit. Maybe hold your hands up. And like he had an unbelievable ability to be like fucking showboating with people who were beating him as well.
Get them unsettled, unnerved. Yeah, they should have used like some like a technology footage and been like, right, see at your prime, we'll slow down this footage. This is how quickly you moved out of a punch. It took you like 0.2 seconds to react. Right, this is you now. You've still not moved. This is you getting punched in the face, not realizing like you're not the same fighter. Stop fighting.
Totally. There were points in the second fight with Tarver where like Tarver was beating the shit out of him, and then he'd like step back and then try and like do a bit of a wiggle or what have you, and it's like, what the fuck are you doing?
It's like you're getting your ass handed to you. Stop doing that. Yeah, I know, it's mental. Just like obviously, it was something that was like ingrained as sort of part of his approach. But I mean, but I guess we're kind of wrapping up. But in terms of like at his prime, at his peak, I mean, if anyone's not watched footage of him, you should go back and watch, like, again, the fight against Tony, for example. Go and watch that. And this is a guy who is considered at the time a pound-for-pound great, and it's Jones Jr. that's coming up in weight to go to super middleweight to fight him. And he's the underdog, and he just puts on a masterclass. And he just looks unbelievably good. And he's just humiliating this, like, world-class fighter. And he's doing it in a superly unorthodox way based on his like reflexes, all these punches from just like, what? How is he throwing that punch? What? Look at this angle, and he's throwing them from all sorts of ways. His movement is like just incredible. It is a joy to watch. So if anyone's not seen it, I highly recommend going and watch at least some highlight reel stuff from Roy Jones Jr. and you will obviously be able to see what everyone raves about, because he's just the most like elegant, fluid, amazing looking boxer.
I agree. I very much agree. Right. Do we have anything else to say about Mr. Roy Jones Jr.?
What we should have done, right, was do the bits I was going to mention and then finish on the bit we just said. But seeing as we can't do that, I'll just mention a couple other things unrelated to his boxing. He was declared bankrupt in 2015.
Well, that's probably why he kept fighting.
Well, possibly, yeah. And this is despite having, a few years previous, having a net worth of something like $40-odd million. So some bad financial choices went on. He was given, apparently, $3 million to pay a tax debt by a Russian promoter. And related to that, he said he had a lot of quote-unquote business in Russia. So Vladimir Putin kindly gave him dual citizenship after he requested it. So Roy Jones Jr. is an American and Russian citizen.
Very nice. Like Steven Seagal.
But, it swings and roundabouts because he's taken the Russian citizenship, he's now banned from entering Ukraine. So no trips to Kiev for Roy.
Oh, you won't be able to visit the Klitschkos.
I was going to say, I just think of that. You won't be able to go and fight the mayor.
Oh my god, that's so funny. I also like, I'm gonna leave everybody with one point to think about here, right? On a real intellectual note, okay? That Roy Jones Jr.'s continued career, as in continuing to fight, is the perfect example of the sunk cost fallacy in boxing.
Go on.
So, for those of you who are not aware of what the sunk cost fallacy is, it's basically, when you continue with something, even though, just simply because you've put so much of an investment and time into it. And I think that Roy Jones Jr.'s, the end of his career is an example of a sunk cost fallacy. He put so much time into his career. This was his life, was boxing. And even though the defeats were racking up, the knockouts were getting worse, he just couldn't give it up because it was his lifetime's investment.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's what it was, because he said that was, he just couldn't step away from it. And we've talked about, we've got all deep in previous episodes and talked about, sense of self-worth, identity, purpose, etc., all being such a focus for boxers, and like the kind of the sort of narcissism about it as well, that it's impossible for them to walk away because they become a regular Joe Blogs afterwards.
Yeah, even if you are commentating the boxing matches on HBO.
Until you decide that you can't be fucked attending
production
meetings, and you just sack it off, which apparently is what happened in this specific case. But I think you're right. I think that is a big part of it.
Yeah,
it's sad too.
It's very sad. Right, guys. Well, we will be back next week with more news and another fantastic deep dive for you. But in the meantime, it's goodbye from me, Ryan.
And goodbye from me, Andrew.